Beyond words, our souls collide in the rhythm where dreams reside. Beyond words, we touch the sky.
Welcome to the Beyond Words Deep Dive Sessions, an inspiring exploration of the book Beyond Words by Marcia and John.
Ever walk into like a meeting or a presentation, really anything, and you think you're totally prepped, but then the whole thing just goes sideways?
Happens all the time.
Yeah, and it can be rough. But that's why I'm excited for this deep dive.
This should be a good one.
Yeah, we're really diving into beyond words today. We're going to unpack how to handle ourselves in those moments, when we need to think on our feet.
When being agile really matters.
Exactly. Agile conversation. So much better than just sticking to a script, right?
Right, and that's actually a key distinction the source makes. It's like over-preparing versus being prepared.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so what's the difference?
So think of it this way. You can have all your talking points memorized, right?
Yeah?
But what happens if the conversation takes a turn you weren't expecting?
You're going to be thrown off your game.
Exactly. And that's where being prepared comes in. It's about being adaptable, ready to pivot when the conversation calls for it.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we become more adaptable and be prepared?
Well, the source goes into a few different techniques. One that I found really interesting is this thing they call P3RAC.
P3RAC.
Yeah, P3RAC. It's a bit involved, but essentially it's a framework for understanding the different levels we're operating on in any given conversation.
Different levels.
Right, like imagine you're in a room with someone and their motivations, their priorities, even their objections, they're all represented by these picture frames on the wall.
Okay, I can picture that.
So P3RAC is kind of a framework for understanding and navigating those different levels, those frames on the wall, if you will.
Okay, interesting analogy. But how do we figure out what those frames are? What's in them?
By listening, really listening.
Right, but how is that different from just hearing what they're saying?
It's about active listening, which means not just hearing the words, but also paying attention to the emotions behind them, the nonverbal cues, everything.
So like if I'm pitching a new product and the client keeps saying, we need something fresh, something different, I need to pay attention to that.
Exactly. You're picking up on these key words and phrases that reveal their underlying motivations.
Fresh, different, those are the frames on the wall.
And the source actually illustrates this with a great example. Andy and Beth are talking about, of all things, grocery shopping.
Grocery shopping?
Yeah, and Andy picks up on how often Beth says fresh, options, quality. And it helps him tailor his responses to address her needs, even though it's just about, groceries. It's subtle, but those small adjustments can really change how your message comes across.
So we're listening for those key words, those phrases that reveal what's important to them, their priorities, their frames on the wall.
Yes. And not just listening, but asking the right questions.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we get people to really open up and share what's in those frames?
Strategic questioning. Now, the excerpt doesn't go into a ton of detail, but they do emphasize the importance of asking open-ended questions.
Okay, I see. So instead of saying are you happy with your current provider? It's more like, what's been your experience with your current provider?
Exactly. You're giving them space to elaborate, to tell their story. And as they do, you start to get a clearer picture of what's important to them, what their pain points are, what they're really looking for.
It's like we're putting together a puzzle.
In a way, yeah. And speaking of paying attention, one thing that really stood out to me in the source was this emphasis on pausing.
Pausing, like taking a moment before you respond.
Exactly. It's so easy to just react, especially in the heat of the moment. But the source argues that taking a pause, even just a brief one, can make a huge difference.
I can see that. Like, if you get a really frustrating email and your first instinct is to fire back a response, probably not the best idea.
Right. You're more likely to say something you regret.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a moment to cool down, process what you've heard, you can craft a much more thoughtful response.
So it's about being intentional with our communication.
Yeah.
Not letting our emotions get the best of us.
Exactly. And, that actually ties into another important point they make about the difference between saying yes, but versus yes, and.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've heard that before. What's the thinking there again?
Looks like this. When you say yes, but, even if you don't mean to, it can sound like you're dismissing the other person's perspective.
Like you're not really listening.
Exactly. Whereas yes, and.
Yeah.
It's like you're acknowledging their point and then building on it.
It's more collaborative.
Exactly. It keeps the conversation flowing in a positive direction.
So it's not just about what we say, but how we say it. And whether we take a moment to pause and really listen before responding.
It's all connected. And, this whole idea of building, of moving forward, it actually connects to another key point about how the source says that action really happens.
Oh, how so?
Well, they say that action requires not just agreement, but positive thinking, feeling, and a plan.
So it's not enough to just logically agree with something. You have to feel good about it, too.
Exactly. And you need to have a plan for how to actually make it happen. Remember that interesting formula the source mentions? EMO ratio sales.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. It's like people might think they make decisions based on logic, but
But emotions play a huge role. Think about it. If you don't feel excited about something, are you really going to be motivated to act on it?
probably not. So how do we bring this emotional piece into our conversations? How do we make sure we're connecting on that level?
Well, this is where I think that idea of P3RAC comes back in, that whole thing about the picture frames on the wall. Being able to move between those different levels of conversation, addressing both the logical and the emotional aspects, that's key.
So if I'm sensing some hesitation from someone, even if they're not voicing any objections outright, maybe I need to dig a little deeper. Ask them how they feel about things.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about picking up on those nonverbal cues, those subtle signs that someone might be holding back.
It's like you're reading between the lines.
In a way, yeah. And that actually reminds me of another thing they talk about, although they don't go into a ton of detail. It's this technique called the SLOW method.
The SLOW method.
Yeah, it seems like it has something to do with this idea of being comfortable with silence in conversations.
Interesting. Silence can be powerful.
It can. Unfortunately, they don't really elaborate on it in this excerpt, but it's something I definitely want to look into further.
Me too. It's like we keep uncovering more and more layers to this whole idea of agile conversation. It's like we're learning a whole new way of communicating.
It really is. And speaking of communication, toward the end, there's this really great point about ending with a call to action.
Oh, right. Yeah, they talk about how instead of just asking, what do you think? It's more impactful to say, what do you think? How do you feel about it? And what is the next action for you?
It's subtle, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot packed into that.
So what's the thinking there? Why is that so important?
Well, when you just ask, what do you think, you're mainly engaging the logical part of the brain.
Right. Yeah.
But to really get someone to act, you have to appeal to their emotions too.
That's where the how do you feel about it comes in.
Exactly. You're acknowledging both the head and the heart. And then to top it all off, you have that final part. What is the next action for you? It's like you're giving them a little nudge to actually do something.
Exactly. It's taking it from just thinking about it to actually making a plan.
And that's often the hardest part, right? Going from thinking to doing.
It can be. But by prompting them to consider that next action, even if it's something small, you're helping them move in the right direction.
It's about making it real, turning those thoughts and feelings into concrete steps.
Exactly.
We've been talking a lot about business here, but I feel like these principles apply to our personal lives too, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, think about any time you've had a disagreement with someone you care about.
Oh, I know those conversations. Imagine approaching those conversations with this same kind of awareness, really listening for those frames on the wall, remembering to yes and instead of yes but.
It could make a huge difference.
I think so. It's about turning those potentially explosive situations into opportunities for deeper connection.
I love that. So it's not just about getting what you want, it's about understanding each other better.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so powerful about this whole concept of agile conversation. It's about approaching our interactions with more intention, more curiosity, more empathy.
It's about really seeing the other person, not just hearing them.
Beautifully said.
Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive. I'm definitely going to be thinking about all of this next time I have a conversation, big or small.
Me too. And for those listening, if this sparked your interest, I definitely recommend checking out Beyond Words. There's even more to uncover.
Yes, like that P3RAC framework and the SLOW method. Oh, and what about that reverse logic method? We didn't even get to that.
So much good stuff to explore.
There really is. Well, until next time, happy conversing, everyone.
Thank you for listening. Give us a like and share your comments. Order the book via the link in the comments. Stay tuned for more.
Beyond words, our souls